Hey, and welcome back. Welcome to 10 Within. Okay, you guys, I'm going to try this again. I spent a couple days ago recording this entire podcast on my late husband, Jim, and the journey of becoming a widow, and it did not record. It didn't catch the audio. So round two, what do they say? The second time, maybe it's the better one? We'll see how that goes. But I feel like this was God's therapy for me, right? I did want to share with you guys a little bit about Jim's cancer story, how we met, ended up what happened and, what ultimately ended up taking his life. Obviously, I have two daughters. Jim and I were together for 20 years. So going through that process of watching him get cancer and ultimately take his life was just such a horrific, truly traumatizing time of my life that last couple days, or a couple days ago when I recorded this, I feel like it's like the actual first time that I've ever by myself had to reflect on what happened from the beginning all the way to the end. I recorded about a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago, a podcast with a friend. They had a podcast called Two Average Girls Podcast, and I shared the story, but it was different because I felt like they were asking questions and they were kind of leading it. When you do a podcast and you're sitting here by yourself solo, sometimes you're having to actually, think, right? Because you're the ones coming up with the information, the story. So it made me really think about the process of what happened, and reliving it was really, really tough. And so I think this is actually a really good therapy. So reliving it, honestly, was extremely difficult. I think that's why I'm not a fan of traditional therapy, because I feel like going back and just reliving the same things that that's happened over and over again doesn't really ultimately serve us well. So it was extremely emotional, and I'm really hoping to get through it today, possibly better than I did last time. So here we go. Round two of me sharing with you guys Jim's cancer story, how it affected me, how it affected my daughters. I am going to do this in a two-part series. The first story of this, I want to share just basically quickly just how Jim and I met, into what happened with his cancer journey that ultimately ended up taking his life. And then I want to do a round two of basically what it looked like afterwards, right? I want to bring in my daughter. My oldest daughter, Kylie, wants to participate. My youngest one, not so much. I want to go over with her a podcast of, really how we both responded to that tragedy that happened in our lives, and what it was like from a teenage daughter's perspective and what it was like from a widow's perspective, and really kind of how we both are doing today and how we feel that it affected us in our lives. So I'd love to do this, like I said, in two parts. That way it's not going to be super long, and that we can have her join us as well. So where do I start? Jim and I met when I was 17 years old. He was 18 years old. I moved to Norco the week that I graduated high school. And my mom and I, my brother, we had bought a house out there, and I was not overly excited to move because I didn't know anyone, right? All my friends lived out in the area that I grew up in, which was Marietta, Temecula area. So the day that I moved there, I actually recruited two of my girlfriends to come and check out my new house with me, my two best friends that we were stuck at each other's hip anyway. And so we were driving around town, and we used to do this thing called scamming. And okay, guys, it's not as bad as it sounds. We weren't looking to take advantage of people. We were just looking to meet boys. It was our way of picking up on guys, I guess you could say. And scamming meant we would go drive and we'd look for nice trucks. And if there was young guys in them, we would go pull them over. And so nice trucks were what we were attracted to when we were 17 years old. It meant they had a job. If they wanted to take us to dinner or on a date, that they could afford to do that. We're like, hey, it's a good place to start. So we went out scamming, and we had seen my now late husband's truck. And we're like, ooh, this is a cute truck. So we pull up next to them, and somehow, I don't even know how we ended up doing this. They pulled over, we pulled over, we ended up exchanging phone numbers, chit-chatting for a minute, and then we all connected and hung out later. I guess it was the 20-year-old dating game, right? That was how we dated. It was our swipe. Now we have Bumble, then we had scamming. However, we ended up meeting up and ultimately started dating very shortly after. Jimmy and I started dating, and then my two best friends that were with me actually started dating two of his two best friends. So it kind of all worked out where we all would hang out all the time. And we had a lot of fun. We had a lot of fun. Growing up in Norco through my teen years into my early 20s was a lot of fun. If there's anything that Jimmy was a good time. And that's just what he was known for. He was the life of the party anywhere we went. He had a lot of friends. He was an extremely good human being. Jimmy was the best soul. I mean, truly, he did not have a mean bone in his body. I always say he's like a golden retriever. He genuinely had the biggest heart. He loved to love people. He loved to help people. He just loved people in general. Jimmy was always known for getting everybody together for, vacations and parties, and just, he always was so social. And that was honestly one of the best qualities I loved about him, but it was also one of the hardest on our marriage, and I'll share with you why. But fast forward, Jimmy and I, we had a lot of fun dating. We did Glamis together and the river together, and we used to go camping together, and we had a lot in common. And we just did a lot. I mean, our whole lives were wrapped up in each other, and we spent a lot of time together and just, dreaming of our futures, and we just hit it off so well. So we dated from 17 to 20. At 20 years old, I got pregnant with my oldest daughter, Kylie. When she was about 10 months old, we ended up getting married. And getting married at 21 years old, you guys, is extremely hard to do. Our marriage was a lot of highs and a lot of lows. And that's because we grew up together, right? We met when we were babies. I mean, my gosh, 17-year-old Loni to now 40-year-old Loni, I had a lot of growing up to do. Plus, we both came from growing up where our childhoods were a little bit unstable. And neither of us had really ever seen like a really healthy marriage. So we didn't have a lot of tools. We didn't have a lot of mentors of leading us to a really healthy marriage. And we hadn't had a lot of healing, right? So we had a lot of our baggage and trauma of our past brought into our relationship, and it was really difficult for many, many, many years. So even throughout all the highs and all the lows, there's one thing Jimmy and I were really good at, and that was being a team. We were really good at working together. We raised kids together, we built a family together, we had built friendships together, we had built a business together. We had done a lot in our lives, and we're very successful at a lot of things. And Jimmy gave us an amazing life, and I'm always going to be grateful to him for that. He taught me so many things. One thing that I loved about Jimmy, and I think what I was attracted to him the most, was his brain. He was extremely smart. I love smart men. I love men that are successful and driven, and I love that Jimmy could just figure anything out. He genuinely was like MacGyver, is what everybody called him. If there was an issue, somebody would call Jimmy because Jimmy would have a solution, and if he didn't have it off the top of his head, he would find one. He was just that guy that no matter what, would figure something out. And he could fix anything. He could build anything. He could literally make anything work. And I just love that quality about him so much. And he had taught me so much. I mean, I feel like, again, in hindsight, the things that Jimmy had taught me truly have helped me so much in this widow journey, because I'm capable of taking care of so many things that a lot of women never learn to do. So I always laugh and I'm like, okay, God, I understand now. Like, I see why I learned the things that I learned and have the skills that I have, because it really has been able to help me continue on living my life as a widow with 2 daughters, and just, being in this world of, we like to race and horseback ride and, do all of these activities and stuff that, it's sometimes hard and challenging to do all of this stuff when you don't have the skills that he had given me. So I'm very grateful to that. I'm going to fast forward to 2020. 2020, the reason I want to choose that year is because that's the year that I started noticing a little bit of change in Jimmy. And it was it was a pretty severe change. This cancer, you guys, came on extremely quick. Like, I felt like I started noticing things like in the last quarter of 2020. It ultimately ended up taking his life of May of 21. So by the time he was diagnosed with this disease, in 3 months later, he had passed away. I want to fast forward to 2020 because that year was such a special year. And only because COVID was obviously this crazy time in all of our lives, right? Like, the whole world shut down. That's never obviously happened in any of our lifetimes. And it was just, it was absolutely stressful and insane. I mean, obviously having kids in school and owning a business, it was a very stressful time. But the silver lining to me in that time was that it actually allowed us as a family to have so much quality time. Jimmy was definitely a workaholic. That man woke up at 4:30 in the morning, left the house, didn't get home usually till 6, 7, sometimes 8 o'clock at night every single day. And then he either worked on the weekends if we were home, or we would be on trips if he was home. So we didn't have a lot of quality time as a family. We did a lot of trips and we did a lot of vacations. We did things like that, but we always had, a million people around us. So what I loved about it is because one of the hardest things that was in Jimmy and I's marriage is that I always wanted a little bit more quality family time. And Jimmy was the social butterfly of the century with a million friends, and they always were around, which was great. I mean, I loved our friend group. I love having people. I love being social. However, I also wanted this balance of being able to have some quality one-on-one family time where it was just us. Like, I don't think in the 20 years that we were together, I'm pretty certain, Jimmy and I never took a vacation, not even our honeymoon, that was just him and I. There was always other people with us. And so, yes, I loved his social quality. I loved his heart, but I always struggled in our marriage because I just wanted a little bit of his time to myself, and he just didn't know how to do that. So fast forward to COVID. Fast forward to 2020, he was basically on house arrest, which was perfect for me because I was like, yay, this is our family time that I've always dreamed about. And so we, played games and we went on walks and we had a lot of good times, truly. And I'm always going to be grateful for those times because we were able to bond and connect like a family and spend so much time together, more time than we probably ever have because work was slow, everything was kind of slow, and we were all home. So that was a special time in our lives. Fast forward to the end of that year, I'm going to say maybe August, September, is when I started noticing, you guys, like just changes in Jimmy. Now again, I've been with Jimmy for 20 years at this point. I knew that man more than I knew anybody else. Well, come August, September, we started just becoming very distant and just there was this big disconnect in our relationship, and I just will never forget just being almost like, what is this happening? What is happening? What is going on in our marriage? Where it was just such this disconnect is the best way I can put it. And this is what our marriage noticed his cancer first. And I think the reason of that is just simply because he changed so drastically with just his ability of showing up and being present, right? It was like he was very disconnected. And so he would come home from work, and again, even though we were together for 20 years, Jimmy was always very good at coming in the door, finding me, giving me a hug, giving me a kiss, saying hello, and then going on and doing his thing, right? He'd always made it a point to do that. If he saw the kids, he'd always acknowledge them. Like, hey girls, how's it going? Screw around with them because Jimmy was a big prankster. He would always have done that. Well, he started coming home and just being super disconnected. He would come home and I wouldn't even know, right? I'd be in the kitchen and he would maybe walk in through the garage or in the front door and I wouldn't know, and I'd go upstairs and he'd be upstairs. And I'm like, when did you get here? And he's just kind of just started becoming a little bit disoriented and just kind of out of it. And he's like, oh yeah, sorry, I was, tired, I just got home or whatever. Just overwhelmed is kind of how he seemed. And I'm like, are you okay? And he was just like, I don't know. He's like, I just don't feel good. And we kind of contributed honestly to stress in the world. I mean, COVID year was a very stressful time, right? Just trying to figure out everything that was happening. We didn't know every other day. It seemed like jobs were closed and somebody was sick and, it was such a chaotic time. And Jimmy really took pride in keeping our employees busy. And, having 50 employees during that time, there was always somebody that was testing positive for COVID or that didn't feel good, that didn't this. So it would be shutting down job projects left and right. And it was extremely frustrating when you're on deadlines and our clients are like, what's going on? We want to move in. It was a stressful time for him. And so I contributed a lot to stress in the beginning. Well, then fast forward maybe, and I'm really bad at timelines, but this also, you guys have to bear with me, as this all happened so fast, right? This went from 0 to 100, I genuinely believe, overnight. So when I'm talking specifics, it's one day it was okay and then one day it was not. And that's real life. This cancer was so aggressive and so just came on so fast that it literally took him overnight to become a different person. So follow along with me as I go down this chain as best as I can of trying to remember everything that had happened and how it had happened. But I want to say it was the end of September. I'll just never forget and this is where I carry a lot of guilt today. And I always ask God to just remove this guilt from me, because I always just feel bad when I think about the last memories that Jimmy and I probably have of good memories together are not such good memories, because our relationship is what took the impact of this cancer first. And I do think, in hindsight, I think that God genuinely did that, broke the relationship, kind of broke the connection between us on purpose to spare me, and I'll kind of explain to you why I feel that way. But, I think that's why I was trying to reflect on the early 2020, because that year was so special. That early time in the year was so special. But the end of the year is where I always carry guilt, because when Jimmy and I were coming into the end of the year, October, November, December, our relationship was probably the worst that it had ever been. And again, I took a lot of it personally. I had no idea he had brain cancer. All I knew in that time was that he was so disconnected, so not communicative at all, so just cold and shut down and shut off. And, I took it personally. Being a wife that had been with him for 20 years, and he'd always made me feel loved. If there's anything that I knew, was that man loved me more than anything. Jimmy loved me so much, and I knew that. And I just felt that part kind of leave. And I was like, it was painful. And so I just never forget, I think it was right around my birthday in October. We were just in a really rough place. And I remember just asking him, point blank, I said, "Are you seeing somebody else?" Because he didn't want to be intimate. He would come home, he wouldn't even acknowledge me. He would go to bed, and sometimes he wouldn't even sleep in our bedroom, which was unheard of in 20 years. There was just weird stuff that was just so out of character for him that was happening. And I was like, okay, there has to be, his attention's going somewhere else. Because even coming home, he was just even disconnected from the kids. He just wasn't his normal self. Jimmy was very much of a family man for sure. And his family was so important to him. But I just felt like that was the first big change. And so I feel guilty, like I say, is because I took it personal and I made it about me and our relationship. And I remember just being in this really dark place. And I remember us sitting down and just having a really deep conversation. I'm just like, what is going on? And he's like, "No, Loni, there's nobody else." He's like, I don't know why I feel this way. I just don't have any desire to, want to be intimate. I don't have any, he's like, which is unheard of for him. Let me just tell you, that is so out of character. And so I was like, just overnight, all of a sudden, what changed? And he just was like, I don't know. That was his response. I don't know. And so, we're going through these motions, and I was just, and my personality is, I'm a fixer, right? I'm like, okay, well, we need to get to the bottom of this. I don't want to be in a marriage where it's you want nothing to do with me. I said, so let's figure it out. Well, he didn't feel good enough to figure it out, and that's the truth. And again, I took it personally. I was pissed, and I was hurt, and I was defensive, and I was mad. I was like, what the heck? Put in the work. We've been here for 20 years. After 20 years and everything that we went through, we were ready to call it quits. I mean, truly. And I was shocked, to be honest, and I think he was shocked that he felt that way, because it was just this very bizarre time. Well, I do believe, again, in hindsight, like I said, that God has always spared me. I think God has always, always, always had my back. And I think that that's what God does. He just shows up in ways that you don't even realize when he's showing up. Because I believe that 2020, early on, Jimmy and I had such a great connection. We had spent so much quality time together with him and I, and as a family. It was such a special time in our marriage. I think that God slowly broke apart that connection for me. Because we went basically from being romantic, in love, husband and wife, to roommates, basically, to then I was a caregiver, to then I was a widow. And so I think that God allowed this slow separation for my heart. And I always feel like God does things to protect us. And even though I was upset about it at the time, and I couldn't understand at the time, and I was just taking it personal and hurt and mad at the time, as I look back and I'm like, wow, okay, Lord, you always have a plan, and you're so much more ahead of the plan than we are. And so I'm going to fast forward now to January. January, Jimmy's just really, really struggling, you guys. His health has just significantly changed. And I want to say, I think it was January, it might have even been December, he did a trip to Colorado. Him and one of his friends flew up to Colorado, and they were driving a motorhome back down that his friend had purchased. Well, this is when he had his very first episode of us like questioning, like, hey, something is going on. They were driving home. He was talking. He was the one driving, and all of a sudden, during his conversation with his friend, he just started not making sense. He was talking like gibberish, and his friend looked at him. He was like, Jim, are you okay? And he said that he just wasn't like responding, and he was like looking at me, so he just like almost like he wasn't there. So his friend got in the driver's seat, and Jimmy moved into the passenger seat, and his friend was like trying to like pull him out of it, but he was just like in this la zone land. And so his friend calls me and puts Jimmy on the phone, and I was like asking Jimmy questions, and he was just not making sense at all. And honestly, you guys, I genuinely thought he was screwing with me at first, and that is the truth, because that would be something Jimmy would have done. He was the biggest prankster on the planet, and he just loved to screw with people. So I kind of thought he was kidding at first, and then, maybe like a minute in, I realized that they were being dead serious. And so I was like, oh my gosh, like, do you think he's having a stroke? Like, what's going on? And his friend was like, I have no idea. And so I three-wayed my doctor in. I called him on his cell phone, and I was like, Dr. K, Jimmy's on the phone. He's on his way home from Colorado. I think he's having a stroke. And so Dr. K is like asking questions and this and that. And, Jimmy was just disoriented. He couldn't answer the questions correctly. Like, he didn't really know the answers to like simple questions that he should have asked. He didn't know answers to the simple questions that were asked. And so Dr. K is like, get him to the hospital. So his friend drives him to a hospital. They go there, they do tests, they do a CT scan. The doctors come back and say, we don't see anything. We think you had a hypoglycemia attack. You haven't eaten maybe, and your blood pressure or whatever dropped. And we were like, okay, that's odd. Like, he's 30, I think he was 36 at this time, 36 years old, and he's never had a hypoglycemia attack before. So where did this come from, right? And so Jimmy was just like, I'm fine. He felt fine. He like came out of it. He comes out of it pretty quickly, but he just, was concerned. And so he said, it's so weird. It's like, I knew what was going on, but like, I couldn't like communicate it. He was like, I could see it happening, like almost like an out of body experience. I'm like, that's so strange. I'm like, well, just come home. I'm like, just fly home, let your friend just drive. He's like, no, I'm fine. I'm going to finish the trip. I'm like, okay. So I was worried. It was very scary and very stressful, like that few hours, because we're like, what is happening? Well, fast forward, he gets home, and, he's like, that was so weird. And he's like, I don't know. He's like, I don't know. He's like, I just feel off. He's like, honestly, I feel like I'm getting dementia. He's like, I'll be on job projects and like with our design team or with clients and employees, people that I've known for years, Loni. And he's like, I swear, like sometimes I can't remember their names. He's like, I know them, I see them. He's like, but then I'm like, who is this person? He's like, it's the most bizarre feeling. And I said, okay. I said, well, what do you think it could be? And I said, I'm going to be completely honest with you as your wife. I noticed a significant change in you. Something is going on. I said, you feel so different. You feel so off. You just feel so disconnected. And I'm a highly intuitive person. That is just, I've always been that way. I've always said it's like my superpower. I always think that, I don't know if it's more of a curse actually, because I think that I just see things and feel things before anybody else does. It's just I'm very highly intuitive. I've always been like that my entire life. And so I just said to him, I was like, something's wrong. I don't know what it is. And we were like, we need to get to the bottom of it. And so I'm going to say the second week in January, probably third week in January, maybe at this point, he's on a job walk and he happens again. So this is like 2 weeks later. And he is same thing, out of body experience. Walking a job site, he was with his design crew and a potential new client, and they were talking about like an electrical panel or something. And he was just talking like he normally would do, selling the project. And then all of a sudden, he said he just had this like blackout moment to where he knew what the electrical panel was and like what he was talking about, but all of a sudden it was gone. Like he couldn't articulate his words. And so he was cognitive enough, just like he was to get out of the driver's seat into the passenger seat, he was cognitive enough to walk away. And so he went and he like walked away from the people, and everyone was kind of like, is Jim okay? Like, what's going on? And I think he had one of our superintendents with him, so that guy kind of stood up, like stepped in. But Jimmy went and kind of like leaned against the wall for a minute, and like, a couple minutes later, like it passed. And like he kind of came back too, but he was just like in a fog. And so he was able to like push himself through this job walk. Well, then he had called me on his way home. He's like, it happened again. He's like, this is such a weird feeling, Loni. He's like, I cannot describe it, but he's like, I literally cannot recall words. He's like, it's so weird. Like, I feel so disconnected from my own self. And so I'm like, okay. I'm like, well, let's get home. Let's get to the bottom of it. On his way home, he's on the phone with one of his friends, and his friend tells him that this had happened to another friend that he knew, and he actually ended up having a brain tumor. And so Jimmy gets home and he tells me, he's like, oh my gosh, I think I need to go to the hospital. He's like, I think I have a brain tumor. And I was like, a brain tumor? Like, what? I'm like, okay, I think you're overreacting slightly. And he's like, well, I talked to this person and they told me that, this happened to their friend and it was a tumor. And I was like, okay. I'm like, that's really strange. And again, Jimmy was so fearful of brain tumors, and let me share with you why. Is because his uncle, who he was really close with growing up, had a brain tumor, and it ended up taking his life. And it was a very hard thing for him to watch and see, and it always made him extremely fearful, which is very strange, because I feel like we've seen people get sick and things happen, but this cancer had always been in the back of Jimmy's mind, and he used to bring it up sometimes. Like he would say oh, what if I get brain cancer? Oh, what if I this? And I'm like, where was this coming from? So again, I always believe we have this inner knowing when you know things, even though you don't know things cognitively. I think just was always fearful of this, right? And so I knew that about him. And so when he brought up the tumor, I said, okay, let's not go there. I said, but yes, we need to get to the bottom of this. Something is wrong. I said, but, and he's like, I'm going to go to the hospital. I'm going to get a CT scan. I said, okay. I said, if you feel like that's what you need to do for our peace of mind, because I think we were going into the weekend. I said, do what you need to do. And then I said, let's see what the results say. I said, you're not going to have a tumor. I said, I can't imagine. I said, so do what you need to do to get that peace of mind. He's like, okay. So he drives to the hospital. He goes and gets a brain scan. He gets his blood work done. He tells them what happened. And everything comes back clean. Nothing, right? No tumors. The CT scan was clear. His blood work was fine. Everything was fine. So he comes home and you could just tell this relief, right? He's like, oh. He's like, honestly, Loni, he's like, I truly thought that it was going to come back with something. And I was like, well, praise God. Like, okay, now we just need to figure out what is going on. So I said, let's make an appointment with Dr. Kermati. And he was like, okay, sounds good. And so I think it was a week later we got into with the doctor. And Jimmy, I just remember just being so, I'm going to go with the word slow, because that would be the last word I would ever use for Jimmy. Jimmy was just disoriented, and it almost seemed like he had so many things on his plate and he just couldn't keep up. He couldn't organize it. But that was not typical Jimmy, right? Jimmy had always had things on his plate and he just couldn't manage his normal routine. And so I remember saying to him, I said, look, you need to take some things off your plate. I said, I've been watching, you need to just take a step back. I said, I think this might be stress. Honestly, I feel like you're super stressed out and it almost seems like you're just overwhelmed, like you just can't handle the load. I said, so we need to lighten the load. I don't care what that looks like. I don't care if that means having to talk to our clients and having to sell off a job, give a job. You need to lighten your load because your health depends on it. And he's like, no, I agree. He's like, I can't maintain this schedule and this pace. And I said, okay, let's figure that out first. Well, he would come home and he would go to sleep and he was just different, right? Like normal Jimmy would have taken action and he would have made his load lighter. He would have figured it out. That's just what he would have always done. And we talked about it, but nothing really changed besides the fact that he didn't do anything different besides sleep, right? So he would come home and he'd sleep. He'd know he'd have a bid due, he would sleep. Like he just couldn't function. And so I just remember thinking, okay, this is not normal. So we go to the doctor, and I remember pulling Dr. K aside, and I said, Dr. K, I said, I'm really worried. I said, something is off. I've noticed now, I said, Jimmy has not been the same Jimmy in a minute. And I said, and I was telling him about our marriage. And that we were literally on the verge of talking divorce, and that, we were just so disconnected. I said, but I'm just so concerned about him now. I said, I don't know what is happening or what is going on. I said, I feel like he's having a midlife crisis. And, Dr. K was like, don't worry, honey. This is a crazy time. I know. He's like, we're going to get to the bottom of it. Don't panic. He's like, we will figure it out. I give you my word on that. I love you guys like family. He's like, I'm here for you guys. We will figure this out. I said, okay. And so he goes in and he sees Jim, and I could just see that he was concerned, right? Dr. K, who was just like, okay, what is going on? Oh, and I forgot this part. Sorry, let me rewind slightly. Jimmy had a ton of ear pain. That was another reason that we made this appointment. He all of a sudden started getting this throbbing pain in his ear, and you'd look in his ear, we got the little ear scope, nothing. You couldn't see anything. He was in scale 1 to 10 of pain with pressure in his ear, where he felt like he had an ear infection. So we actually went back to urgent care, said that he thought he had an ear infection. They looked, they're like, no, your ear looks great. He went then on the phone with Dr. K, and Dr. K sent him to an ear specialist, and the ear specialist looked in his ear and was like, no, we don't see any indication why you should be in pain. So then when we went to Dr. K's office, we went there specifically to get him out of pain. That was our goal at this point. I forgot about this. And so I think that the pain too was so severe. I think that that was what was causing him to also just be so like on edge and stressed and tired and unfunctionable. And so Dr. K does a technique called prolotherapy. And I knew that this therapy could at least get him out of some pain, because they basically put like a needle, like an injection into the nerve receptor, and it resets the nerve receptor, and it basically tells your brain to like get rid of the pain there. And so he did these injections inside his ear and was helping him get some relief while we were trying to get to the bottom of what was causing this. And so Dr. K, you know, after he evaluated Jimmy and did the prolotherapy and looked at him, I could see that he was just like concerned. And so Dr. K always likes to like pull me aside. He's like a big, like an uncle to me, or a big brother, I don't even know. He's just like, he's been such an amazing man, an amazing person in our life for so long, that he just has the biggest heart, and he just genuinely cares. And so he pulls me aside and he said, you know, he's like, you know, you definitely can see that Jimmy was off. And he was like, you know, I think we need to get an MRI done. He's like, I definitely want to get his blood work done, all these things. And I said, an MRI? I said, why? And he's like, you know, I'm not freaking you out. He's like, I just want to test everything. I don't know. I'm not saying there's anything. He's like, but I want to look at every area possible to figure out what is going on. I said, okay. I said, well, Dr. K, we're supposed to be doing a trip to Glamis next week. We do a big trip in Glamis for Super Bowl weekend. And it literally is Jimmy's favorite trip of the entire year. His friend Brian started it, and every year it has grown. And then Jimmy started, you know, participating, and he was in charge of the Flip Cup Challenge, and they would put on a poker run. They would have bands come, potlucks. They did a big Super Bowl thing. All the TVs, everybody had TVs along their trailers, and everybody watched the game. It was just a really fun event, and Jimmy literally looked forward to this event every single year. And as soon as it ended, they started planning it for the next year. Like, he just was obsessed with this one trip. And so I said to Dr. K, I said, you know, Jimmy really wants to do this vacation, but I'm so worried about him. And I just said, he doesn't have the energy. He doesn't have, like, I just said, he's so sick. Like, I just don't know if it's a good idea. And Dr. K looked at me and he's like, you get that man to this trip. He deserves a vacation. He needs to go and reset. Let him be with his friends. Let him stop with the stress of his health. And I said, okay. And he said, you know, whatever we need to do to get him there, he needs to be there. I said, okay. I said, I'll do that. And so we go home and, you know, kind of get everything together for the week. And, you know, me and the girls, we are fully capable of packing and doing all the things. You know, Jimmy taught us to do all that because he was always working. So me and the girls, we always wanted to go on trips. So we would make sure the motorhome was loaded, packed, cars were loaded. You know, we knew how to do it all just because we always were helping him. So I told Jimmy, I said, hey, look, we're going to go on this trip, but you're taking it easy. Doctor's orders. I said, let me and the girls, and I had an assistant at that time, and we had a couple employees, I believe, that I had come over, and we all just loaded everything together. And so, you know, I drove us there. Jimmy slept in the back, and I said, we're going to have a good trip. We're going to make this fun. Well, right before we left, Dr. K got him an MRI. He got an early appointment. So Jimmy went and had the MRI done on whatever day it was, like a Tuesday or a Wednesday or a Thursday, I don't even know at this point. And then the next day, we left to Glamis. Well, while we were driving there, Jimmy was like stressing on the results, right? He was just like, do you think we're going to get the results back? Do you think Dr. K is going to call and tell me? And I said, to be honest, I said, no, I think Dr. K wants you to enjoy this trip and just go not stress on your health and go enjoy your friends and then come home and we're going to get to the bottom of it. I said, let's just try to make this a good time. He's like, okay, I'll try. You know, he's like, I just feel like something's wrong, Loni. And I said, I know. I said, something's off. You're not, I said, I see it. I understand. I said, but it doesn't have to be something severe, right? I said, let's just get through this trip. Let's go have fun. And then we're going to figure this out. He was like, okay, you know, and so we're driving and, you know, he went in the back and slept because I'm telling you, he could not stay awake for a couple hours and without taking a nap. And so we get to the desert and, we park, we get all unloaded, and I remember within like the first 24 hours of being there, I cannot tell you, probably 10 different people, you guys, came up to me and was like, Loni, what's going on with Jimmy? Is Jimmy okay? Like, he seems really out of it. Like, is something wrong with him? I mean, different people, like, and I just kept saying, I said, I know. I said, he's having something go on. We don't know what it is. We're trying to get to the bottom of it right now. And they're like, okay, like, well, we're really concerned about him. He just seems so different. I said, I know. Well, we're at the trip on the vacation. You know, Jimmy's uncle came from Alaska, and his cousins and his parents and my parents and all of his friends and all of everybody was there. And so, you know, Jimmy really wanted to pull through. But every single time I went in the motorhome, you guys, I would find him either on the couch, on the floor, on the bed, just wiped out, passed out cold, like to the point where you could almost not wake the man up. And it was so hard to watch, because I was like, what is going on here? Like, this is not Jimmy. Jimmy is the center of the party no matter what. I don't care if he's sick. I don't care if he's exhausted. I don't care if he's worked a crazy amount of shifts. Jimmy will always man up for the party. That the fact that every single person, the most important people in the world to him, were in this place, and that he could not get up to participate, made me like just like this physically pain, like something's wrong. Like, this is so much bigger than whatever I was thinking it was, that he could not pull through. And so I remember waking him up, and I was like, Jim, are you okay? And he was just like disoriented, you guys, just disoriented. And he just like, no, I'm not okay. And he's like, have you heard from Dr. K? And I said, no. He's like, will you call him? And I said, yeah, let me call him. And so I called Dr. K, and he didn't answer. I called him again. He didn't answer. And so I come to Jimmy, and I said, no. I said, he's not answering. He's like, well, do you think because he got the results he doesn't want to tell us? I said, well, let's go with the theory, no news is good news. I said, I'm going to go with that. I said, we are going to get to the bottom of this. Let's try to enjoy this trip. And so he's like, okay. Well, I was watching him I'm telling you guys, now we're on like this trajectory of like within every 24 hours, his abilities and his health were changing so drastically that it was happening in front of my eyes. You know, it went from like little things in our relationship where I was like, okay, he's not interested in being intimate. He's kind of not interested in even showing affection. He's not interested in communication. He's checked out there. Like, those were things, you know, but now it was like so drastic where it was like he could shuffling his feet, like he wasn't like walking well, he wasn't like standing upright, like he was kind of slouched over, he just had this like glaze over his face, like it just was progressing so fast. And so now I was like just stressed out, right? I remember going and sitting in my friend's trailer, and I was like, you know, just so stressed. And so I was like, I need to call Dr. Karamati. Like, so I was blowing up his phone now. And I texted Dr. K. I said, Dr. K, it's just me. I'm not with Jimmy. I said, I need to talk to you. Please call me. And so he does. He calls me. And he was like, hey. He's like, are you alone? I said, well, I'm with my two friends. I said, but Jimmy's not here. I said, Dr. K, I'm so concerned. Like, what? I said, he is not okay. I said, I literally feel like every 24 hours he's just getting worse. And Dr. said, okay. He's like, I wanted to wait till you guys got back into town. He said, but I got Jim's results back. And then he was like quiet for a second. And I'm telling you, my stomach, you guys, just like dropped. Like just like that, like as if you're on a roller coaster. I was just like, I just knew something that he was going to say. And he was just like, we found a tumor in his MRI. And I was like, what? Like, what does that mean, Dr. K? And he was like, don't panic. Don't freak out. He said, the good news is that we found something. He said, at least now we know we can get to the bottom of it. And he said, it doesn't always mean that it's something deadly. He's like, there's so many different types of tumors out there. We don't know what type of tumor it is. And one thing about Dr. K is I feel like, just like as God was so gracious and like slowly took this disconnect from me and Jimmy and just like slowly broke this thing apart. I think that Dr. K kind of did the same thing. Like this slowly rolled out with me, like, don't panic. It's okay. This is it. Like, and he just kept, I think Dr. K knew exactly what it was, but I think that he didn't want me to panic. And so he was just being so gracious with his delivery and trying to keep us like together. Because I think he knew that if I fell apart, Jimmy was going to fall apart. So he was doing his best to keep me together. And so I just remember him saying, you know, when you guys get back into town, he needs to have brain surgery like immediately, and we need to find out what type of cancer this is. And, you know, get this tumor basically like diagnosed, I guess, whatever it is. We need to have, when you guys get back into town, he's going to have surgery and to have this tumor removed. And so he said, obviously I think of the location of it's playing a big part in, all of these side effects of what's happening to him. And I just remember just being terrified, you guys. I didn't even know how to receive it. I just felt I don't know if anybody that's listening has ever been either diagnosed with cancer or somebody that they love been diagnosed with cancer, but it's this, just those words when you hear that somebody you love has a brain tumor, it's so hard to even hear. It's so hard to even articulate the feeling. It's just this heavy sickness, fear. I was terrified feeling. It was so hard not to panic, right? And so Dr. K, I remember him saying to me, he was like, Loni, he's like, I want you to do me a favor. He's like, I know it's going to be hard. He said, but I don't want you to tell Jimmy. I don't want you to tell him you talk to me. I don't want you to tell him anything. He said, I want Jimmy to enjoy this trip because when he gets home, we are going to fight this thing. He said, but let him have these next couple of days and just try to enjoy it the best that you can. And so I said, okay. I said, I will do my best and I can do that. So I hung up the phone with him and I was just bawling, crying. I just remember being so terrified and so scared and so sad and I just remember because everything just fell into place. It all just started making so much sense that this man is really sick and I saw it happening. We just didn't know what it was. And I just remember sitting there with my two friends and I was just how am I going to do this, you guys? How am I not going to say anything? How am I going to look at him and not just break down and crying because of just knowing that he's going to get told that he has a brain tumor, which is his biggest fear in all the land. And, my friends were like, we can do this, just they were hugging me and we just, I just remember crying out everything that I had to cry out. I remember walking outside and just saying, okay, Loni, you can do this. Just tapping into that strength. And I was like, you can do this. Let's get him through this trip. I want him to have fun. I don't want to freak him out. And so we go, and I remember going into my mom's trailer. She's the only other person that I told. I didn't tell anybody else. And I remember going in there and I was just I talked to Dr. Karamati and he found a tumor. And my mom, of course, crying hysterically, lost it. And I was like, but we can't tell Jimmy. And so she was like, what? She was like, you guys need to go home. You need to go home now. And I said, Dr. K said, there's nothing we can do today anyway. He's putting together the best of the best team. He's he's working on finding doctors, doing all this stuff while we're here. And we're talking it's the weekend anyway, right? So when we get home, he's going to have this whole game plan in place. And so I said, I don't know how to not look at Jimmy and not cry. I don't know how to not I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to not tell him or anybody, And my mom was just we can do this, And so my mom was just we can do this. And so I said, okay. So we go for the next 24 hours. And he, again, you guys, I'm telling you, like I said, every 24 hours was just getting worse and worse and worse. And so at this point, he hasn't even come out of the motorhome now, basically, within an entire day. And so I was like, why are we here? Why are we doing this? And so Jimmy was so fearful. He kept asking, did you hear from Dr. K? Did you hear from Dr. K? I was like, no, I haven't. And he was like, I know something's wrong. I know that's not why he's not calling. And I said, I know you don't feel good. I said, do you want to just get home so we can get to the bottom of this? He's like, yeah, let's just go. Which, again, tells you a lot about Jimmy's health. And it always just scared me more because Jimmy would have typically been absolutely not. I don't care how sick I am. I'm not leaving the desert and my friends and this. The fact that he just didn't want to be there, it was just such another confirmation indication that this is something major going on. And so I remember going outside and telling all of our friends, and the way we were parked is this huge group of people, and because we were one of the participants in putting things on, we're parked right in the center of it all. And I was like, is there any way you guys can help us get out of here? And everyone's like, oh my gosh, yes. Everyone loaded up. Everybody was so gracious and helpful. And we left and we went home, and the next day, which I think was Super Bowl Sunday, I called my doctor. I said, look, we came home. We need to get to the bottom of this. And he said, okay, come into my office today. So he met us in his office, and I'll never forget, you guys, watching Jimmy receive the news. And the worst part of just having to pretend that I didn't know was I just felt like such a liar, right? Because I was just I didn't know how to respond because I felt like I'd already known, right? So I hate keeping things from people in general, let alone your husband. And so I remember Dr. K looking at him and just saying, I got your results back and you have a brain tumor. And immediately his words after that was don't panic. He said, I've put together the best team there is. And he said, I will do everything in my power to make sure that you're here to walk your daughters down the aisle. And I just remember watching Jimmy receive that information. And it was just heart-wrenching because it was almost like the life just like came out of him. And again, I think that inner knowing, maybe Jimmy just knew that he was dying already. I don't know. But I just felt like I saw the defeat in him. Like as soon as he heard those words, I just saw him just like, it was just, I can't describe it. It's that intuition thing that I have, is I just saw it. And I remember looking at him. I remember being like, oh, heck no. I said, get out of that state now. I said, you do not get to quit 2 seconds in. And he's like, kind of like, what? And I said, no. I said, you are not going to quit. And I said, we are going to fight this thing. And Dr. K said the same thing. He was like, you have to stay strong. He said, you heal it here more than you heal it anywhere else. You have to stay strong mentally. And I think that was always what I was so frustrated on him with, because Jimmy just didn't have that strength. And I think it was because he was already so sick. And I think that his brain just wasn't working like it used to. Like, Jimmy was the strongest person on the planet. I mean, that man just never got sick, and he was just strong. He always carried on. He always took care of everything. He just was always a solid, like, foundation. And to watch him just break, it was really hard, because I was like trying to put back to pieces, like however I could. I hired a coach to come, like a mental toughness coach, to like help him tap into like that mental state. I hired a hypnosis coach to come and help him try to like reframe the way that he felt subconsciously about this cancer. Like, I tried doing everything that I could to be able to help him with that mental toughness, but it just has to come from within. And I just felt like he already had that inner knowing that I think he just knew, I guess. I don't know. Fast forward, we went and met with the brain surgeon doctor, and those doctors were brutal, man. They were cold, and they were just like, basically, this tumor has a couple different levels. There's like a glioma, and there's like a second one, and then there's glioblastoma. And, he was very he's like, we have no idea what type of tumor it is, but by the aggressiveness of it and like your symptoms, he's like, it seems like it might be more on the glioblastoma side. He said, but we won't know until we're in there. He said, but I'm going to be completely honest with you. Where the tumor is located is located on the part of your brain that is your communication part. And so he said that the chances of you losing your communication is very high. He said it's a very risky surgery. He said we wake people up in the middle of the surgery, and we will have you talk to us so we can make sure to go in as deep as we can, but without affecting your communication. And I remember Jimmy was like looking at me like I'm going to be awake. And both of us, our eyes were like, what? And so they're like, well, just briefly, right? We wake you up for a few minutes while we go into that section. And so the guy just said, he said, but there is no guarantees. We have to tell you there are no guarantees. And he said, when we get in there, just depending on the type of tumor it is as well, depends on how important I think it was to remove the whole thing or not, right? And so he said, obviously if we get in there and it's glioblastoma, we have to remove it all. He said, so even if that means cutting into your ability to communicate, you have to remove the tumor. And so I just remember Jimmy looking at me, and he was just like, I could just tell, like, terrified, right? Like, what does this mean? And so I remember leaving there, because Dr. K had given us so much hope, right? We left Dr. K's office feeling like strong and like, okay, we can do this. And then we left this doctor's office, and I remember us both looking at each other. And I am one that is very much like, you have to stay mentally strong. And I just wanted to be that person for him. And so even though I was thinking it, those words never passed my mouth, but I think he knew when we were looking at each other, when these doctors were talking, I was just like, this does not sound good at all, right? And so we leave, and I remember literally praying to myself as we're walking out, and I was like, God, give me the strength to say the right things to this man, because I did not want to be the person that caused Jimmy any more fear. I wanted to be the encourager. And so I just remember, like, just, Lord, take this fear away from me so it doesn't transfer to him. And we went and sat in the cafe downstairs because we were waiting for something. I don't forget what, like an MRI result or something. And so we went and sat in the cafe, and I remember sitting in front of him, and I just remember saying, I said, look, these people are not God. They have no idea what the outcome of this is. I have no idea what the outcome of this is. I said, it sounds terrifying, and I completely see that. I said, but we are going to pray, and we are going to put this in God's hands, and we are going to pray that God will allow these surgeons to do this, to remove this without affecting your abilities. And so I said, but I want to have a conversation with you, because if it does take your abilities and you are unable to communicate for a minute, I said, I believe, and I don't want to go there. I said, but if that happens, I need to know what you want, because I will be your voice. And so I remember sitting in front of him at this coffee shop, and he was just saying, just basically that he doesn't want to end up like his Uncle Peter, and he doesn't want this to take his abilities, and he doesn't want to be a vegetable, right? He's like, if I am not able to live like a normal life, he's like, I don't want to live that life. He's like, I'd rather just die. And so I was like, okay, I hear you. And so, he was then fearing. I said, let's not go there. I said, we're not going to go there. I said, there's no point in living something that hasn't happened yet, okay? I said, let's not allow ourselves to go there. And I said, we know what we're working for. We know the goal. The goal is to keep you intact, to keep your abilities, to keep your health. We are going to work on everything that we can to get there. Let's focus on that. And so, he was just like, okay. So we go home, we get prepped up. They literally had him in surgery like 1 or 2 days later. And I'll never forget having all of my family, all of my praying friends, everybody praying for him for a miracle during the surgery, because it was terrifying having him go into the surgery and not knowing what the outcome was going to be when he came out. And so I'll never forget sitting in the hotel room. We were in Los Angeles, and my whole family was there, and my phone rings after hours of surgery, and I look, and it's the doctor. And I just remember picking up the phone, and the doctor saying, surgery's done, Jim is out, everything looks good. He said, it was a miracle, Loni. He said, we were able to get the entire tumor without affecting his abilities at all. He said he is going to come across a little bit slurred and slow and things like that at first. He said, but that will completely rehab right back. He said, it's just because of the surgery and the swelling and the pressure and all of that. He said, but I want to share with you. He said, it was an absolute miracle. He said, because when we went to wake Jimmy up during the surgery, Jimmy panicked when they woke him up. So they had to put him back to sleep immediately, because he was like thrashing all over the table and he freaked out. And so they didn't want him to harm himself, since his skull was removed off of his head. And so they immediately put him back out. So they had to do the surgery with him sleeping, and were able to get the entire thing completely out. He said, it is a glioblastoma, so I wanted to confirm that with you. He said, but we were able to remove the entire thing. Well, I have no idea what this type of cancer means and what that even means, right? So when they say remove the entire thing, I think my immediately thought was like, oh my gosh, like it's gone, right? And so I go to the hospital. It was still COVID rules, so only one person you were allowed to have visitors. So I went and visited him in the hospital. And I remember him just being so grateful that he woke up, and that, he was slow, and just obviously he had brain surgery, right? So he was out of it, and he was just kind of just like groggly. But I remember him just being like, I can talk, like everything's okay. And I remember him actually picking up the phone and like calling a few people and, talking as much as he could. And I know he was a little bit slower, but he was still able to like have a conversation. And I think he was just so happy for that. So we were in the hospital, I'm going to say for 2 days. It might have been 3, maybe, at max. And they start checking us out to go home. And I remember being so terrified to go home, because I was like, okay, what do I do now, right? Like, he's had brain surgery. Like, I don't want to be in charge of taking care of this. Like, it was just scary to take him home, knowing, like, what had just happened. And they're like, it's fine. You're going to follow up with us in a week. He's like, we need to follow up with the oncology team and then figure out the next steps from here. And so I said, okay. So I remember the doctor, too, when he came in to talk to me in person and to check in on Jim, I remember him just saying that he's like, I want to give you guys a little bit of hope. And this was like the same doctor that was seriously like the doctor of just, he was like the king of discouragement when we first met him, of just like, nope, this is really bad. Like, you're probably going to lose your abilities. You're going to probably die. Like, he was just so cold. And we both left there just like, oh my gosh. Well, now he'd done the surgery, and he was like literally in shock, you guys, that this was the outcome. And I mean, he like came in beaming. Like, he was like, this is a miracle. He's like, we can fight this. Like, he was like, I've seen people live with this for years and years and years. And I don't know if I shared this with you guys or not, but glioblastoma, the average lifespan of somebody, the longest lifespan I think is 5 years. Obviously, people can die a lot sooner than that. People have lived a little bit longer than that. But that 5-year mark was kind of what was in my head, right? That you can live with it at this point. And so the doctor said, because the tumor is completely gone, there's so many things that we can try to do to keep the cells at bay. He said, I've seen people live for years and years. And so, it was just giving you that hope that this was not, we had time, right? And so the doctor leaves, we get Jimmy, we take him home. I remember driving home with him. I just remember looking over and I could just see that he was just excited to be out of the hospital. And I feel this almost this a little bit of glimmer of hope, right? That he had surgery and he has his abilities. And I think he was just excited to go home and see his friends. And driving home, we get home, and I believe a lot of his friends were there. Everybody was there to say hi because nobody could see him in the hospital because of the stupid laws. And everybody leaves. It was me, my girls, and 2 of my best friends, and we were staying at the house, and we all went to bed. And we wake up in the middle of the night to him screaming bloody murder, you guys, nothing I'd ever heard before. And I was like, what the heck is going on? And so I get up, and he's running around our bedroom, frantic, in pain, grabbing his head, screaming. I'm like, what's wrong? What's wrong? He's like, I don't know. And he's screaming. And so I grab the phone, I call 911, and I'm like, I don't know what's happening. My husband just had brain surgery, and he's in so much pain. I said, we need somebody here now. And so the paramedics come, and Jimmy's puking at this point because he's in so much pain. And so they put him on the gurney, they take him out. And I said, he just had brain surgery. He has brain cancer. I said, he just 2 days ago or 3 days ago had surgery at Cedars-Sinai. We have to get him back there. That's where the brain surgeons are. That's who will know what to do. And the paramedics were like, we can't take him there. He's having a brain bleed. He will die. I said, we can't take him to Corona. I said, I've been to that hospital. They are not equipped for this. I said, what can we do? And they said that Corona, I guess, is because it's in their network, I guess, they're required to go to the nearest hospital, especially, I guess, based on the severity of him. And so I said, we can't go to Corona. And so the guy said, he comes out with a form. He was like, you can override our decision and we'll take you wherever you want. He said, but I do have to have you sign this form basically saying that we're taking the liability off of us. And I'm telling you that the chances of him dying are extremely high if we do not get him to this hospital now. And so as long as you're aware of that and you're willing to sign that if you take him wherever you want us to, that's going against our recommendations. And so I said, well, do you think he's going to die? And the paramedic looked at me and he was like, he's having a brain bleed. You need to get him to a hospital now. And so I said, okay. I'm not the doctor. I don't know. I said, then take him wherever you think. And so they take him to Corona. We rush him into Corona. We go in there. The doctors take him out. They, getting him under control with pain, evaluating him, what's going on. And the doctor comes to me and he literally looks at me and he says, why would you bring him here? And I was like, are you kidding me? I didn't want to bring him here. I said, the paramedics forced me to bring him here saying he's going to die unless I get him to a hospital immediately. He said, we do not have a surgeon here that's available or has the ability to do this type of surgery. He said, so I said, well, we need to get him to Cedars-Sinai. I said, can we air flight him? Can we this? Can we that? And all the answers were no. And I don't even recall why. I think the air flighting was because of the elevation and with the pressure. I think he couldn't do that. And then getting a hold of somebody, right? And so this doctors, the whole team, I remember them calling. And Jimmy's in the room and they have him under sedation now of trying to get him out of pain. And I just remember just looking at him and just his eyes were black, you guys. Just black. And I just remember thinking oh my gosh, Lord, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And so I'm calling my family and I'm just Jimmy's in the hospital. He's having a brain bleed. They can't help him here. We need to find somewhere to go. Trying to get a hold of my doctor, but it's the middle of the night, right? Trying to get a hold of everybody. Nobody's answering their phone. So I was totally panicked. And so the doctor comes and he's I got a hold of a surgery team in Riverside. He's they are able to do this type of surgery. He's we need to get him there. He said, but I'm just going to be honest with you. I don't know if he's going to make it to the hospital. And I was what? And I said, there's nothing we can do now. And he said, pray, literally. And I was okay. And so he's like, we need to go now. And so, I mean, they rushed him, loaded him, got him in the hospital, and got him over there so fast. And I remember following behind them. I wasn't driving, but I was in the passenger seat, and my friend that was driving. And just, I mean, both of us were crying and just like, what is happening? You know, my kids are at home with my other friend. It was just terrifying. So we get to the hospital, and the doctor's teams comes running out, and they're now asking me, like, we haven't been able to get a hold of anybody. Like, we need to know all the information that we need to know of what he had done. And I'm like, first of all, I'm not a doctor. My name is Loni Morris, and I'm a stay-at-home mom. Like, I am not qualified to give you the brain surgery specs. I said, I can do the best that I can of the 1% probably that I retained of what the doctors told me. I said, so I was trying to, like, in my language, speak on brain doctor terms of, like, what, like, I regurgitated, you know, from them to these doctors. And sure enough, they're like, okay, we're going to have to work with what you gave us. And they took him into surgery, and same risk of losing ability, same risk of everything. And I just remember all of us praying, Lord, like, you know, the chances of him surviving this were getting really low. And so doctors come out a couple hours later. It's a miracle, he's alive. They said, we don't know what happened to his speech. We don't know what's it going to be until he's awake and out of it. Right now he's super groggly and just totally disoriented. And we're like, okay. And he's like, which is, again, normal after having the type of pressure from the blood in his brain. So they keep him in the hospital. This time I was like, you guys are keeping him there for as long as possible, right? And so he ends up staying in the hospital for about a week, and we then come home. We now, like, the next day have an appointment with the oncology team. I remember calling the doctors and saying that he's in the hospital, this is what happened. So all of his follow-up appointments got delayed. And so we go now to the oncology team to basically figure out what we do to fight this cancer. And they go and they do an MRI. They want to check and see everything that's going on now that he's had another surgery. So they do the MRI, and we remember sitting there, and the doctor pulls me aside. And he says, you know, I want to talk to you. And so, and Jimmy was so out of it, by the way, you guys. I forgot to mention that part, that after the second brain bleed, he just wasn't the same, right? He was just almost like he was like in a la-la land, like in a fog, just like didn't have a lot to say, mumbled. He definitely lost his ability to articulate well. He just wasn't the same. And so I remember sitting in the doctor's office, and I'd always made it very clear to every doctor team that we ever worked with. I said, if there are things that are scary, big things, I don't want Jimmy to hear it. Because I don't know what he's processing and not, because he wasn't communicating a lot. And so the doctor pulled me aside, and I just had a feeling it was bad. I'm like, clearly he wants to only talk to me. And so he pulls me aside, and he sits me down in his office, and he's like, we did an MRI, and we got the results back. And he said, I'm so sorry to say this. He said, but the tumor is already back. And I was like, what? And he said, and the worst part, he said, it's not back to where it was. He said that it actually came back right in the center of his brain where it would be inoperable. There's no way to access it. And he said, and it's on the, it's sitting on like the central nervous system of his entire body. He said basically where it will affect all of his abilities, the ability to walk, move, talk, anything, right? It's just like it will take over your entire everything. And he's like, I'm so sorry. I said, well, what can we do? You know, and he just said, he's like, well, you know, the only thing that we can do is radiation and chemotherapy. And he said, he said, but there is no cure for this type of cancer. He said those type of treatments have like a less than 5% chance or 2%. It was a very low chance of doing anything. And I was like, what? And he just said, you know, I'm so sorry. And he said, well, I said, there's nothing. He said, well, we do have things that are not like FDA approved, that are like trials. And he said, things that are working. And I said, well, what are those? And, you know, he talked about like these caps that people are wearing. He talked about doing like immunotherapy. He talked about all of these things. And I said, okay, well, sign us up. We want to do all of them. And he was like, you know, but doctors don't provide them really. It's like they do their thing, and then they're like send you into like these trial things, is what I understand correctly. And so he said, but we can't do any of those until we go through like this. He said, you have to do A and B first before you do C. And so I said, explain to me what these things are. And so he starts telling me, well, basically radiation and chemotherapy, he'd said that does like a less than 3, 5, 2%. It was such a low number. Like basically it's not going to do anything. However, radiating him to the center of his brain, the doctor said, can leave some major deformities, right? Like it can ultimately be more damaging than anything else. And I said, well, I don't want to do that. And he said, he said, that's what's recommended. I said, okay. I said, well, give me alternatives. And so then he's telling me about, the immunotherapy. And he said, immunotherapy, basically they take your immune system, they almost like program it to go and fight against that cancer cell and send it into your body specifically. And so I'm like, okay, well, let's use that. And so he's like, again, I can't do that until we do this. That is just how it works here. And I was so pissed because I said, why? I said, if I'm understanding correctly, everything you tell me. I said, I know chemotherapy, what that does. I know chemotherapy kills everything. I said, so let me ask you, if the only thing that you say that might be a possibility to work, that is actually working, is immunotherapy, which relies on your immune system, why would you destroy his immune system first? That makes no sense to me. And the doctor did look me straight in the face and he said, I agree with you. I hear you. He said, but I cannot do C without doing A and B. And he said, I'm so sorry. And he said, we need to get this scheduled. We need to get this going right away. And I said, I need to process this for a minute. I said, let me go home and talk to our family. So I go home and Jim he's like, what's going on? What'd the doctor say? He's just like, and that's not how clear he said it. He's like, he's just mumbling, like, what, huh? Like, he just like didn't even absorb anything. And I just said, I said, the cancer tumor came back. And, I felt like he was just kind of like, almost at this point, just numb, right? Just like, what does that mean exactly? Like, I don't think he was actually comprehending it well. And so I said, what do you want to do, Jim? I said, they said that these treatments are just going to be everything that you don't want. I said, what do you want? And he's just like, whatever you think. Just like the shell. And I'm like shaking him, tell me what you want. Like, wait, fight, find that fight in you. And he just was just defeated, and it was just so hard to watch. And I used to get so frustrated with him. So I was just like, dig deep. You gotta dig deep. And he just didn't, and so I remember going home, he was giving me zero feedback, and I talked to his parents and my parents and my family, and I was just like, I don't know what to do, you guys. I said, this is what the doctors are telling me. It's like, damn if you do, damn if you don't, right? There's basically, there is no cure for this type of cancer. Can they prolong his death? Yes, possibly. They said it's less than 5% chance, so that's a possibility. But there's extreme high risk of radiating the center of his brain that it's going to destroy everything else. I said, so if there's anything that Jimmy told me was that he didn't want to lose his abilities and be a vegetable. I said, so in order to save his life, we have to destroy his life. And I said, that's not what he wants. I said, but he's not able to tell me or confirm now where we're at. I said, you're his mom and dad. What would you do? What should we do? And my whole family, we all kind of disagreed that quality over quantity. Jimmy wanted a quality life, and give it to God, and said, I think we're going to look for alternatives. I said, there has to be somewhere in this world that will do this immunotherapy without having to do the other first. I said, let's find that place. And so we started calling around, just facilities outside of the United States. Again, we were still locked in COVID rules. So traveling to some of these countries was not even accessible. They weren't accepting patients because of COVID. So we had called around, spent probably a solid 2 days of just pure research. Like, where can we go? What can we do? And we found a place in Arizona. We found a place in TJ. The TJ place had a waiting list. Arizona, what I liked about Arizona too was that it was in the United States. My kids could come, they could see them, they could participate and be there. The place in Arizona is the place we ended up choosing. I talked to the salesperson for an hour, told them everything that was going on. It was like their medical salesperson, right? Like, you called them and they're the ones that told you all about the facility, all the treatments, everything that they do. And, they just said that they worked with an immunotherapy person that they knew that they could get them, they just sold me basically on these things, saying that they think that they could really help us. And so we drive to Arizona, Scottsdale, me, my aunt, and my late husband. It's like a 6-hour drive from wherever we were. Get there, we go in, and we see the doctor. And the doctor evaluates him, and she literally, same thing that the doctor in Corona says, is like, why did you bring him here? And I said, because your salesperson I was on the phone with for an hour telling him everything told me that you guys could help him. And she said, I'm so sorry. She said, that was not correct information. She said, we can help. She said, but he's going to need a lot more than what we can do here. And I literally remember just feeling so defeated. And I remember looking at Jimmy, and Jimmy was looking at me, and it was just like this. He was just looking to me to like, what to be doing. Like, he trusted me so much, and he knew that like I was fighting so hard for him. And I just remember like feeling like I'd let him down so much, because I was like, just like, oh my gosh, like how did I just drive him across the desert, 6-8 hours, whatever it was, after having two brain surgeries and just being so sick, to find out that they cannot help him. I was so defeated, you guys, and I was so scared and just so stressed out. I feel like I didn't even know what to do, right? I was like, God, like what do I do? Like, I don't know, like he's dying and I don't know what to do. I remember sitting outside on the curb and I was like just bawling, crying. And sorry, it's just like, it's so emotional to relive it. I feel like this is why I don't like normal counseling, because you relive the things that you went through. But I just remember sitting there crying and just thinking, God, like, where do we go from here? Like, what to do? Like, he's dying in front of our eyes and I just don't know what to do. And so I sit there and the phone rings, and it's the freaking doctor, the oncology team that wants to do the radiation and chemo. I was like, oh my gosh, is this a sign, God? And so I never told the doctors that I was looking for alternatives. I kind of just said, give me a day or two to think about and talk to the family. Well, they're following up with me and they're like, have you made a decision? We need to get this started immediately. And I was like, I'm going to be completely honest with you. I'm sitting in Scottsdale, Arizona at the moment. I said, I'm searching for somebody that's going to help him without destroying him. I said, I don't want him to be a vegetable. I don't want that life for him. He doesn't want that life for him. I said, so there has to be a place that exists. The doctor was just basically like, he was annoyed, you could tell. And like, probably like, this girl's an absolute imbecile. And he was like, you're not going to find that here. And so he was kind of cold and just mean. And I said, well, I don't know what I'm going to do. I said, to be honest, we just got here and you're right. They can't help him. I said, so I don't know. I said, we're heading back that way. I'll keep you posted. And so he said, okay. He's like, and he was just civil, but you could tell he was like annoyed, like probably thinking like, just get over here and do what everybody else in the world does. And I just was not going to. I was not going to do that to Jim. I just said, Jim, we're going to help your body heal, or God's going to take you home. I'm not going to make you a vegetable. We were driving, and I remember probably an hour down the road, my phone rings again, and I look down, and it's the hospital from TJ, the one that had a waiting list. And they called me, and they're like, hey, we can get Jimmy in. And I was like, wait, what? And she said, yeah, we can get him in. I talked to the doctor, the staff, and I said, okay. I said, well, we just drove all the way to Arizona because of the salesperson that I talked to that said they can help him, and they just basically said that there's nothing that they can do. I said, I cannot afford to go to TJ for you guys to tell us that there's nothing that we can do. I said, so how do we do like a teleconference over the phone of a tour? I want the doctor to see him, do all of these things before I head to TJ. And so she said, we can make that happen. So she gets the doctor, we talk to the doctor sees Jimmy, like just over the phone, and they give me I gave him the full rundown. Again, I already talked to this facility once about Jimmy, but I didn't trust anybody at this point because I had already been sold once, right? And so I talked to the doctor, the medical person, gave me a tour of the facility over the phone, and there happened to be a man sitting in one of the chairs that was one of the patients. And, he's like, wave everybody, this is somebody that might come and see our facility. And the guy waves, and he's like, hey, can I talk to him? He's like, if you have any questions, I'd love to talk to you. And I was like, yeah, sure. And I said, well, my husband has, glioblastoma brain cancer, and, doctors basically have, said there's nothing that they can do for him. I said, so we're just trying to find alternatives. And he was like, wow. And he said, I have glioma brain cancer. And whatever the phase of it that he had, or level, there was level 1, level 2, and level 3. I think he had the level 2. So it wasn't the bad one like Jimmy had. It was one right below that. He said, but this place saved my life. He said that I was diagnosed with this cancer, I don't know, it was like years before, like 8 years or something before. He said, I went to a treatment center. They they got my tumor stabilized and, had actually reduced it down, shrunk it. And I've been, thriving since. He said just recently the tumor started becoming more active, so I came back and we're doing another treatment. And he said, obviously God willing that we can get it under control again. And so he said, yes, I would highly recommend bringing them here and see if they can help. And so I was like, oh my gosh, Lord, like what are the odds of having anybody get on the phone? They got an opening, anybody on the phone, the guy has cancer, brain cancer. Like I was like, okay, Lord, like this is it, right? It just felt right. And so we literally beeline to Tijuana. And I'll never forget driving through Glamis, right? We like cut through Arizona and we were like driving through the desert. And I just remember thinking like, how is this my life right now? Like we should be out and camping like with our family and our friends and doing all the things that we do. Like now we're like fighting for Jim's life. Like it's just so crazy, you guys, how life can literally change in a snap of a finger. And I'm talking fast, right? Like he was diagnosed in February and I want to say was in surgery a week later, and then now we're talking like 3 weeks later. So 1 month, right? My life is completely flipped upside down. And so we go to Tijuana. We lived there for 6 weeks. And honestly, the place was great. If anybody that has cancer out there, genuinely, I will do another podcast eventually about alternative, because I'm a big believer in alternative medicine. I'll share with you what they do and all the things. But we were there for 6 weeks and they did everything that they said they were going to do. They made Jimmy's body strong. They fed him the best foods. They gave him the best supplements. He had every IV infusion of the sun. They gave him every single building block that his body needed to be strong. However, his brain was just still not fully there, And so he was sick going through this treatment. They did the low dose chemotherapy. They did immunotherapy. They did, targeted therapy. They did, all the way from, hyperbaric chamber therapy to just colonic therapy they did everything, right? I mean, across the board, from like medical stuff to just traditional like colonics and cryo and all the things to like heal your body, right? IV infusions. So they just hit you in every single area of your life. And so I just saw his health though deteriorating. I just saw that, you'd get like a glimmer of hope, and then it would kind of be like, I was like fearful to get too hopeful, but it just was like, it was just this roller coaster of emotion. Well, I remember we were supposed to be there for 6 weeks. I think it was Easter. So March, April, whenever Easter was. I think it might have been March. We went home just for the weekend, and that was his first time like actually coming home and seeing the kids. We'd been in Mexico maybe for like 3 or 4 weeks, and we got home and, his family, everybody came over, and he was like laying on the couch, and he was just super out of it, like just not the same, not really able to have conversation, not really able to communicate, things like that. But happy to be home, happy to sleep in, our house with his dogs and his kids and just with his family and his friends. It was just, you could tell he was happy to be there. We go back, finish out the treatments, and I just remember telling my mom, I was just like, gosh, I said, I know we've all been praying for a miracle. I said, but I just don't know, like it just doesn't look good, it doesn't feel good. And my mom was like, you have to stay strong, God can do this, God can do a miracle, God's going to provide a miracle, there has to be a point where you also have like this like common sense factor too, of like, I don't want to be naive and have my head in the sand. Like I believe that God can do miracles, and I was believing for a miracle and praying for a miracle, but I also had this sense in me that was like, okay, Loni, you also have to live in reality too, right? And so the reality was he was very sick. Can God provide miracles? I 100% believe so. Was God going to provide a miracle? I don't know. And so we finish up these treatments. We go home. I remember just being so fearful to have him home now, right? Because I felt like he's in such good hands. Like I felt like this little bit of a weight lifted off to me while he was living in Mexico, because they were taking care of him. Well, now we're back home and it's on me to give him injections, me to give him his medication, me to make sure his diet's clean, me to make sure that he's being taken care of as properly as possible. On top of life, with 2 kids and a business and everything going on, like life does not stop when you're in cancer or survival mode, right? And so I just remember being home and just watching him deteriorate so fast, you guys. And he just started like losing it, and just his brain, like he would wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning and like get up to go take a shower and be like, I have to go to work, where are my keys? Where's my wallet? And I was just like, Jim, no, I said, you're sick. Like you're not going to work right now. We're working on healing you, remember? And he was just like pushing me and yelling at me and mad at me. And I just remember just like, he's a big guy. Jimmy was 6'1". And I was just like, I can't man this guy. Like, and he was just unstable on his feet. And so I remember having my family over, and I was just like, I don't know what to do, you guys. Like, he is getting worse. And he's unstable. He's like shuffling around. He's not even picking up his feet. He can't communicate. He's just mumbling all over the place. And like, you could kind of understand him on some things, but not on everything. And it was like, you're always like, wait, what? What are you saying? You know, he lost his ability to write. Like, he was just struggling, you know, and frustrated, which I totally understand. And so I remember taking him to my doctor, and I just remember saying to Dr. Karamati, he had like this really odd, like, sore that was like coming out of him, like oozing out of him. And Dr. Karamati, like, you know, gave him an IV drip, and was just like, I don't know what to do, Dr. K. Like, what do we go from here? And so, you know, we were supposed to follow back up with we were going to go to Mexico again. 6 weeks, you're home for a few weeks, and you go back. So we're like in this at-home process. Well, I said, I need help. Like, I said, he's a danger to himself. Like, he's a big guy, and he's just angry and frustrated. I said, I don't know what to do. And so Dr. K said, we need to get you some help. He said, we need to have maybe a caregiving company come in and just like help take care of him. He said, we'll have somebody come and evaluate him and do all of that. I said, okay. So they end up having somebody come to my house, and they end up evaluating him. And long story short, they basically said that he's a danger to himself. Walking is like super scary, because if he falls into his head, he could die. And like, that cannot happen. And he was shuffling his feet, like he just wasn't able to walk well. He was losing one side of his body, the ability. So I remember he would like get off the couch, and like sometimes his body would just give out, and he would just like fall to the ground, and he was just slowly deteriorating. You know, we got him a walker, and he would, you know, use that to get around the house, but he just wasn't able to take care of himself. And so I remember just like me and the girls like watching, and the girls like, Mom, is Dad okay? Is Dad okay? And we're like, you know, yes, he's sick, you know, but we're praying for a miracle, you know, and just like trying not to stress them out. But, you know, in hindsight, again, I just really wish, my girls both say to me to this day that they wish that I would have been more honest with them and told them the severity of Jimmy. But I didn't want to scare them to death. And, you know, you don't know how to handle that with kids. And I certainly didn't handle it the best way, I suppose. But, you know, you always want to protect your kids. And I just was like, I just played it up as if it was going to be okay, just because I didn't want them to stress any more than they already were stressing. And so now that he passed away, you know, they always say they wish they would have known that, not that I knew he was going to pass away by any means when he did, but they just wish they would have known the severity, because they feel like they would have done things differently too. But obviously God has things happen the way it happens, and you can only do the best that you can while you're living it. And so I ended up having this company come. They said that they were going to have to put him like on bed rest, right? Like he cannot move. He's a danger to himself. And so I remember them leaving, and I was just like bawling, crying, and I was like, this is exactly what Jimmy did not want. Like, he did not want to have to be bedridden and people take care of him. Like, Lord, what am I going to do? And so I remember going into the room downstairs, because we'd moved him down there now, just so he didn't have to go up and down the stairs. And I laid in bed with him, and I remember grabbing his hand, and I remember just talking to him, and he wasn't communicating at this point seriously at all. I feel like nothing came out of his mouth made sense. It was just like mumble jumble. And I remember like looking at him, and I just remember feeling so just defeated and just like so sorry, because I was like, his body is so strong, yet his brain is gone. Like, this is exactly like what he didn't want. But I didn't know what else to do. I was like trying to heal his body, and everything's getting healed but the cancer. And I just was like, I remember looking at him, and I said, I just had the nurses leave, and I said, they are going to recommend that you are on bed rest. Basically, you're a danger. It's dangerous for you to be walking around the house, and if you fall, that it can kill you. And I just said, I know, Jimmy, this is not what you wanted. And I said, I'm so sorry that this is where we're at. I just remember saying, if you want to fight this cancer and you want to put in fight, I will fight this with you for however long. I will do everything and try to find everything in my power that I can to help you survive this. I said, but if you don't, I want to let you know that I'm okay with that too. That the girls and I will be okay. And I remember him grabbing my hand. Actually, I was already holding his hand. I remember him looking at me, and this is the first time in a long time that he said anything that even made sense out of his mouth. And he literally looked at me and he said, thank you so much for saying that. And kissed me, and he laid back down. And I know that this might sound very strange to all, but I feel like it was like his spirit almost that was just like talking, because he'd never spoken that clear in a long time. And so I just remember thinking to myself, like, I didn't even know what that meant, but it was just like this powerful, like profound moment that we had together. And I just remember walking upstairs and just like praying, like, Lord, like, what do I do? Like, what do I do? Like, your will to be done here. And a couple hours go by, we were just doing whatever we were at the house, and he was sleeping downstairs, and he woke up like in a ton of pain again. And we're like, okay, what the heck? You know, and not like brain bleed pain, but just hurting and struggling and uncomfortable. And me and my aunt, we both looked at each other, and she was like, this is odd. Like, he's not usually in pain. I said, I know. And so we're kind of watching him, and maybe 30 minutes go by, and I'm upstairs and she's downstairs, and we both had this overwhelming feeling at the same time. And she was like, Loni, and I'd look over, and she was like, have you seen Jimmy? I said, you know what's so weird, Chris? I said, I feel like we should just take him to the hospital. I said, I don't know why. She's like, okay. She's like, I literally came up here to say that to you. She's like, I feel like I have this overwhelming feeling that we need to take him to the hospital. And she's like, and I don't know why either. She's like, but he seems uncomfortable. And she's like, we're trying to get this all sorted. Like, let's just maybe get him out of pain while we're waiting for the nurses to come and get this whole thing set up. So I said, okay, well, we're going to have to take him to Hope Hospital in Orange County. It's like a 45-minute drive from my house, because they allow guests. And she's like, okay, let's do it. So we end up taking him to Orange County, and we go and we stand in the waiting room for a minute. I'll never forget him just being so tired and out of it. And just, I remember standing there, and he was in his wheelchair, and like I was like holding his head up, and he was like sound asleep. And we stood there for like an hour, probably, like waiting to get checked into this hospital. And then the doctor, you know, they called us back. We go and we get a room, and they were allowed me and my aunt to go back. And we're sitting in there with them, and I just told the doctor the whole story roughly. You know, he's sick, cancer, count him up to speed. So they do some tests on him, check vitals, this and that. You know, he's like, we can get him comfortable. He's like, but, you know, there's no signs of anything major happening. He was like, however, he's like, you look like you haven't slept in a very long time. He's like, when's the last time you slept? I laughed. I was like, I don't know, maybe 3 months ago. And he was like, doctor's orders, you can't stay here anyway because of the rules with COVID. So I want you to go home, and I want you to sleep. He said, tomorrow we will put a game plan together of how to get him comfortable at home, situated. This doctor was amazing. And so I remember I laid on the bed with Jimmy for a minute, and I was just talking to him, just saying, hey, look, like, the doctors, I can't stay here. They want to keep you over here overnight just so you're comfortable. I said, I just want to let you know that, you know, I'll be back in the morning. It's going to be fine. Like, he can't talk, right? So I said, you know, everybody knows like what's going on. You know, you don't need to worry or stress on it. There's a plan in place. I said, you just rest and relax, and I will be back first thing in the morning. And so like he squeezed my hand, and that was kind of like our way of communicating. And so I gave him a kiss, and I left. Well, I woke up, I went home and I went to bed. It was actually the first night, you guys, that I'd slept in like ever, right? I'd slept hard. And I remember waking up to my phone ringing, and I look at the time, and I was like, oh my God, it's 8 o'clock. And immediately I was sleeping, so I was kind of disoriented. I was thinking, oh my gosh, it's Jimmy, right? Because Jimmy has always been the one to call me when I was gone, just from all the hospital visits that he's had. But it like reality set in that Jimmy doesn't have a phone. He's not able to talk. Like, it wouldn't have been Jimmy. And so I answer, and it's a woman on the other line, one of the nurses, and she's like, hi, Loni. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I said, I told you guys I'd be there at 8 o'clock. I said, I just woke up. I said, I'm getting in the car. I'm heading there right now. I'm so sorry. I'm on my way. And she was like, Loni. And I was like, what? And she was like, Jimmy passed away this morning. And I was like, wait, what? How? And she was like, you know, his heart just stopped beating. And immediately, you guys, I had that, like, I'm overwhelming, like, oh my gosh, like I wasn't there. And she was like, you know, he was not uncomfortable. Like, she was like, I didn't even know. I literally don't even remember what she said, because I was like so shocked. And so I hung up the phone. I remember sitting on my bed, and I remember, I think I called my mom. I was like, oh my God, Jimmy died, and I wasn't there. And she was like, what did I just said? Yeah, I said, his heart stopped. And she's like, oh my gosh, okay, I'm coming right now. And so she had Chloe with her, and I'm like, don't say anything to Chloe. And so I remember just being completely just discombobulated. And I remember God just like having his hand over me. I really do remember like that feeling of just like God's like trying to like keep me from panicking. And I feel like God removed that guilt almost immediately of just not wanting to be there, of just Jimmy has always taken care of me and the girls. Always, always, always. And I know for a fact that that was such a Jimmy move to die in a hospital where he wasn't with me at our home with the kids. Just, that is such a Jimmy move. Like, he just, no matter what, he always took care of us. And so I remember walking into Kylie's room, and my face must have said it all, because I just remember looking in her room. It was her and her friend in the bed, and I just was like, Dad passed away last night. And she was like, what? Shocked, and she's like, how, like, what? She was almost like as if I knew that he was going to pass away, and I didn't tell her. And I was like, I didn't know that he was, I said, honestly, the doctors, everybody said he was fine. Like, he was healthy. That the doctor actually said to me he could live like this for a very, very long time. And so I was like, I know. And so she was just, I didn't even know what happened. All I remember is just like, I think we were standing there hugging. And then I remember Chloe walking in the door. And I didn't even say a word. I think because she probably felt my mom's energy. Chloe's intuitive like I am. And I remember just like looking down the stairs and just like looking at her. And I just remember her just like falling to the ground. She was just so heartbroken. And there's nothing worse in the world than having to tell your kids that their dad died. And that's probably something that's going to take me the rest of my life to get over. That pain of watching them receive that information was heart-wrenching. And watching them, just their little hearts break. As a mom, you're just like, it just hurt so bad. And it still hurts to this day. You just want to protect your kids from everything. And it's just like, watching them hurt like that was the worst moment of my entire life. And so, fast forward, I couldn't go to the hospital. I was just like, we need somebody to come and, obviously visualize him and, confirm that, it was him and sign off. And I was like, there's no chance I'm doing that. And so my dad and my aunt went and did that for me. But it's just so crazy how it happened. And it's so crazy how I genuinely believe that me and Jimmy's last conversation, I think Jimmy just was ready to go home. And Jimmy, you guys, like I told you, he said he will never lose his abilities and want somebody to wipe his butt and do all the things that was literally going to happen in the next couple of weeks or days, I should say. And Jimmy literally didn't want to be bedridden. He didn't want people having to take care of him. He wanted to be able to take care of himself. And it's pretty crazy till the day that he died, that last day, the day that we had talked and I said, you either heal and I'm here, or you can go home. I'm okay with that. He chose to go home, and it was like, I just felt like he was such like that move of just like, nope, I'm never having somebody have to take care of me. And I genuinely believe that he willed himself to die. And the fact that his heart stopped, and the doctors, everyone was like shocked, like that. There was no indication at all that he was dying. And so I just feel like that was Jimmy's move of just like, he literally got his wishes in the sense of he was able to walk himself to the bathroom, to his bedroom, to wherever, even though he was struggling with a walker, he was able to do it himself till the day that he died. And to me, I think that that is as successful as a mission that I guess we could have accomplished. And, one day I think looking back, I think God will reveal, why he put you through these things and why things happen in our lives. But in the meantime, it's just finding that faith to believe that there is a higher purpose in this world that we cannot see and we cannot comprehend, and you have to trust and have faith that God's plan is always the best plan. And even though we can't understand it, is that one day, I think in hindsight, we will see the bigger picture, and I think it will make sense to us all. But I know this has already been a very long podcast, so I'm going to have my daughter on with me next one, and we are going to continue of just what it looks like of, healing as a widow, healing as a daughter when your dad passes away, and just what the next step of our life looked like. But thank you for tuning in, everybody, on this emotional roller coaster of Jimmy's cancer journey. It's definitely a hard thing to relive, but it's also something that's part of life, and tragedy strikes. And I know I'm not alone in this. And, if you're out there and you're struggling and you just need hope, lean into God, man, because I've done it both ways. And let me tell you, leaning into God just makes it a heck of a lot easier. So hope you all have a great day.